What if I told you that everything you've learned about Eden is incomplete? What if the serpent hadn't been the villain of the story, but the only voice that dared to reveal what was truly hidden behind the perfection of paradise? Imagine for a moment that Eva didn't fall. She woke up. The fruit did not bring sin, it brought vision. And the real danger has never been knowledge, but ignorance. Today, you will discover what did the snake actually offer, and why its message was silenced for millennia. Have you ever wondered why a story as old as that of the Garden of Eden still provokes so much debate, doubt, and interpretation? Why, even after millennia, do we feel that there is something there, something unspoken, something hidden between the lines of the most famous creation account? Perhaps you have felt this unease too, that feeling that the traditional narrative doesn't explain everything. Stay with me, because what you are about to discover may challenge what you thought you knew about spirituality, consciousness, and the awakening of the human soul. When we think of Eden, we imagine a place of absolute peace, a paradise untouched by the pain, division, and darkness of the world. But few people realize that behind this perfect image lies a profound mystery. A mystery that occult philosophy, Gnosticism, and the oldest spiritual traditions have tried to preserve in some way. Eden was not just a divine garden. It was also a state of unconsciousness. Adam and Eve walked among crystal-clear rivers, lush trees, and the luminous presence of the Creator, yet they did not understand themselves. They were alive, but not awake. They had beauty, but lacked clarity. They possessed everything, but did not know who they truly were. And perhaps you've already experienced something similar, a period in life when everything seemed calm, stable, comfortable. But at the same time, you felt inside that something essential was missing. That there was a part of you asleep, waiting to be found. Eden in the Gnostic vision represents exactly this stage, a spiritual infancy. A place of protection, but also of limitation. A cradle where the soul rests, but is not yet awakened to its true divine nature. It's curious to think about, isn't it? Because we always hear about Eden as the perfect place, the pinnacle of human purity. But what if that purity was merely an absence of consciousness? What if the true freedom of the soul could only emerge when Eve, and later humanity, faced the light and shadow of knowledge? Sometimes, awakening requires traversing the unknown, relinquishing security, and confronting one's own spiritual reflection. Perhaps you felt this too, that moment when everything changes, when an inner revelation transforms your perception of the world. As we explore this story in the light of profound spirituality, an uncomfortable but essential question begins to emerge. If Eden was so perfect, why was something hidden? Why was there a limit imposed on human consciousness? Why did knowledge about one's own soul need to be kept silent? These questions have echoed for centuries among seekers, philosophers, and scholars of ancient wisdom. And today, you will walk through this same mysterious territory. Notice how the narrative takes on another dimension when we look at it not as a moral myth, but as a symbolic map of the human journey. Eden ceases to be merely a physical place and transforms into a state of mind. And in this state, something fundamental was missing: the perception of one's own inner divinity. Adam and Eve were innocent, but they were blind. They were complete, but they ignored their true potential. They were free, but they were unaware of their own freedom. This contradiction is a central part of occult philosophy, and perhaps it is something you have already felt in your own life. Now, before we move on, let me make one thing clear to myself. This story isn't just about the past. It speaks of human awakening, the search for truth, the moment when the soul begins to see beyond appearances. And it is precisely here that the big question arises that will guide the rest of this video. If Eden was perfect, why was the greatest truth about the human soul hidden? The answer to this begins to reveal itself when we understand what was really happening in that silent garden. And when you perceive this hidden layer of the story, something curious begins to happen within you. It's as if a silent part of the mind, the one that always sensed there was more behind this myth, finally finds words to express what it has always felt. And perhaps, as you listen to all this, some memory, emotion, or intuition is awakening within you as well. If so, share with me in the comments, what has touched you most so far? Your perception, your doubt, your spiritual vision. All of this makes this space a true community of seekers. If this kind of reflection resonates with you, if these interpretations of Eden, Gnosticism, and the awakening of the soul make sense in your journey, take the opportunity to leave your like now. This seems like a simple, almost small gesture. But believe me, it's exactly what makes YouTube understand that this content has value and deserves to reach other people who, like you, are seeking deeper answers. And of course, if you feel you belong on this path, that you want to continue exploring these hidden stories, these symbolic truths, this broader vision of spirituality, then subscribe to the channel. Your presence here is essential. Every new person who arrives, who comments, who participates, helps keep this project alive, helps expand this message and transform this space into a meeting point for all who wish to go beyond the surface. Feel truly invited to be a part of this. This isn't just a channel, it's an ongoing journey, a thread connecting seekers from various places, each bringing their own light, their own perspective, their own experience. And as you join us, something powerful begins to happen. This story ceases to be just about Eden and becomes about all of us. And now that you've entered this state of reflection, we can delve deeper, because understanding Eden as this initial level of the soul is only the beginning of what was truly hidden in that silent garden. Eden has always been described as a perfect, silent, and sacred place. But this silence carried something that doesn't always appear in the most common interpretations. It was a silence that seemed pure, but in reality hid a profound absence of consciousness. Adam and Eve walked through the garden like children who don't yet know how to interpret their own existence. They lived, breathed, felt the wind touch their skin, but all this happened without reflection, without depth, without the perception of their own spiritual identity. It's curious to think about this because, on the surface, this innocence seems like a gift. But looking at it from another perspective, it becomes a kind of sweet blindness, a light so soft that it prevents the soul from perceiving its own strength. For Gnostic traditions, this state was the starting point of the human journey. Eden was not a reward, it was a starting point. It was not fullness, it was neutrality. It was a place where nothing threatened, but where nothing invited growth either. And perhaps you have already lived through such a period in your life, a seemingly calm, stable, safe moment, but one that deep down left you trapped in a shallow cycle, as if something were missing and you couldn't yet identify what it was. The feeling of being alive, but not awake. Of moving forward, but without truly understanding the impact of each decision, the reason for each path. This is precisely the energy that permeated Eden. Harmony without awareness. Decisions without weight. Existence without reflection. And that is why, in occult philosophy, it is said that the true prison is not made of walls, but of ignorance, of not knowing who you are, of not perceiving the potential you carry within yourself. Adam and Eve lived in a kind of spiritual bubble, an eternal childhood where nothing truly confronted them, where there was no reason to expand their minds, to question, to seek something beyond. Their purity was not the result of wisdom, it was the result of a lack of perception. And this perception is what transforms everything. Because the moment you become aware of what you are, what you feel, what you think, life ceases to be just a backdrop and becomes a journey. The innocence of Eden represented the primordial stage of the soul, an initial version that had not yet discovered the power of doubt, the power of hidden truth, the silent call that exists within every human being to evolve. It's like looking at the world with eyes that haven't yet learned to see the backstage of reality, the invisible details that shape every event, every emotion, every choice. Reflecting on this, it becomes clear why so many things were forbidden in Eden. The prohibition wasn't about morality, it was about maintenance. Maintenance of a phase. Maintenance of a childlike consciousness, without contrast, without questioning, without transformation. It was like keeping a small flame inside a glass dome so that it never risks becoming a wildfire. Because when it grows, it illuminates more than it should. But at the same time, when the flame grows, it reveals what was hidden in the shadows. Now, delving deeper into this vision, we realize that the ignorance of Eden was not an accident. It was part of the structure. That paradise only functioned as long as consciousness remained dormant. From the moment someone questioned, observed, or sought meaning, the entire symbolic system would begin to unravel. This happens in life too. You just need to start truly observing your emotions, noticing your patterns, identifying your pains and desires, and everything changes. Things that once seemed safe suddenly show their cracks, and what seemed right reveals nuances that didn't exist for you before. Consciousness changes the scenario. Consciousness always changes everything. Therefore, thinking of Adam and Eve as perfectly happy beings in Eden is an incomplete view. They were comfortable, but not awakened. They had beauty all around them, but lacked inner depth. They lived surrounded by perfection, but without the capacity to understand the meaning of that perfection. And here arises a powerful reflection. The absence of questioning may seem like peace, but it can also be the gentlest form of stagnation. When we understand Eden as a metaphor for an initial state, everything takes on a different meaning. The human journey doesn't begin with the fall. It begins with awareness. It begins the moment the soul realizes that there is something beyond what is being shown. And this perception, even if it brings discomfort, is what transforms everything. The hidden truth, the one that has always been there even unseen, begins to reveal itself when attention is born. And it is at this exact point that the biblical narrative ceases to be just a story and becomes a reflection of the inner journey of each one of us. I could explore many paths from here, and all of them would lead us to profound reflections on mindset, evolution, transformation, and inner awakening. But before moving forward, it's worth noting that this passage from the silent Eden to the questioned Eden doesn't happen by chance. It's the beginning of a turning point, the start of a movement that will shape everything that comes after. And understanding this is essential to comprehending the impact of what is yet to come. Now, I want to expand on this vision and touch on aspects that aren't always discussed when we talk about Eden and spiritual awakening. Every detail of this narrative has a symbolic intention, and each symbol hides a message that spans centuries. As this understanding deepens, a new scenario begins to take shape. A scenario where innocence ceases to be a virtue and becomes merely the preceding stage of wisdom. And before I move on to the next layer of this mystery, comment below. This opens my mind. Or any phrase that translates what you've felt so far. I really want to know how this reflection resonated with you. Now let's move on, because there's still much to be revealed. The serpent has always been portrayed as the great antagonist of the story, as if it were an agent of chaos that arose to destroy the perfection of Eden. But when we look behind the symbolic walls of this myth, something completely different begins to appear. Something that challenges not only the traditional version, but also how we understand transformation, mindset, and spiritual awakening. The serpent appears in the narrative not as an enemy, but as a messenger. And this simple inversion changes absolutely everything. Because if it didn't come to seduce but to reveal, then the entire moral construct we know loses strength and opens space for a much deeper hidden truth. In various ancient traditions, Egyptian, Indian, Mesopotamian, early Hebrew, the serpent is a symbol of healing, rebirth, and knowledge. The serpent's very movement, crawling and shedding its skin, represents the idea of leaving the old behind so that the new can be born. Isn't it curious that this symbol appears precisely at the moment when humanity is about to undergo the greatest transformation in its history? Think about it. Every journey of real growth requires you to abandon a previous version of yourself. No evolution happens without leaving something behind. It's almost as if the serpent were a metaphysical mirror of our own inner journey. That point where you realize that stagnation cannot continue and that a decision needs to be made, even if it brings discomfort. And this is where the narrative takes on a completely different brilliance. Because at the moment the serpent appears, Eden doesn't change. It's Eve who changes. The garden remains the same, the trees remain the same, the light remains the same. But her perception begins to open, as if a crack were forming in the veil that obscured her vision. The serpent doesn't arrive threatening, it arrives questioning. It doesn't impose anything, it invites. It invites reflection, doubt, autonomy. And that's the key. Awakening never happens through imposition. It always arises from a question. Sometimes a simple question, sometimes a question you don't know the answer to, but that pulls you out of autopilot. How many times in life has a single question radically changed your path? A thought that seemed small, but that opened a door you didn't even know existed. When the serpent speaks, it doesn't offer rebellion, it offers awareness. It's highly symbolic that this is the first voice in the entire biblical narrative that encourages a human being to think, to decide, to look inward autonomously. It's as if it were saying, "There's something inside you that hasn't yet awakened, and you need to see it to discover who you really are." This is the kind of message that breaks patterns, challenges structures, and shakes comfort zones. The serpent represents the necessary rupture, so that the human mind doesn't remain eternally asleep in an innocence that doesn't allow for choices. In fact, if we reflect deeply, we realize that the serpent acts exactly like a spiritual mentor in the oldest stories, appearing at a liminal moment, offering a truth that cannot be ignored, and bringing the kind of revelation that changes everything. Not because it compels, but because it illuminates. Illumination in itself is transformation. And transformation always comes with impact. The serpent, symbolically, is the turning point, the backdrop where consciousness awakens and the journey truly begins. Without it, everything would remain the same. With it, nothing could continue as before. It's worth remembering that ancient peoples viewed this symbol with reverence. In healing temples, such as the Temple of Asclepius, serpents were represented as guardians of life and wisdom. In Eastern traditions, the Kundalini serpent represents the dormant energy at the base of the spine, waiting to be awakened to elevate human consciousness. These parallels are not a coincidence. They show that, long before the serpent was associated with evil, it was already recognized as a bearer of profound revelations. And it is precisely this role that it fulfills when it approaches Eve. It awakens something that was there, but had not yet been activated. Notice how this connects directly to the state of unconsciousness that defined Eden. While the mind remains asleep, you can live in a paradise without perceiving anything beyond the surface. But the instant something triggers an inner click, a question, an insight, a new perception, everything gains new layers. The serpent is that click. It is the beginning of change, the bridge between innocence and lucidity, the revelation that opens the door to an entire universe that has always been there, but could not be seen with closed eyes. And when we think of it this way, history ceases to be a narrative of downfall and becomes a narrative of birth. The birth of human consciousness. The first step on a journey that spans centuries, beliefs, cultures, mythologies, and ultimately, also your own life. Because every awakening begins like this. Someone, some situation, some symbol appears and calls you to see beyond the obvious. Sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes it's overwhelming. But it always changes everything. And it is precisely at this point that the story of Eve begins to cease being just a distant myth and starts to reflect what we all experience at some point. The moment when the known is no longer enough and the unknown begins to call. A silent, yet powerful invitation to see what was hidden. If this reflection resonated with you in any way, leave a comment below. I choose to awaken, or any phrase that translates what you felt. I want to know how this part of the journey resonated within your own path. Now we continue, because the next layer of this story reveals even more than meets the eye. The encounter between Eve and the serpent remains, to this day, one of the most distorted and simplified moments in all of spiritual tradition. We grew up hearing that this scene represented the ruin of humanity, as if it were a clandestine dialogue between innocence and perversion. But when we observe this moment through the lens of occult philosophy, we realize that the narrative has been inverted over the centuries. What happened there was not a trap, it was an awakening. Nothing in the serpent's posture points to seduction or threat. On the contrary, there is a calmness, a lucidity, and a strange kind of respect for Eve, as if she were capable of understanding truths that were still dormant within her. This completely changes the interpretation, because it transforms Eden from an idealized scenario into a stage for awareness. The serpent does not approach with hostility. Its presence carries no shadow, only depth. It does not speak to corrupt, but to illuminate. It is a symbolic figure representing hidden wisdom, the kind that does not shout, does not force, does not impose. Its question, so simple at first glance, is like a silent lightning bolt that breaks the veil of blind obedience. The serpent does not suggest rebellion, it suggests self-awareness. It makes Eve look at the imposed limit not as an immutable rule, but as something that deserves to be understood. And this small change of perspective is enough to shake the entire structure of Eden, because consciousness, once awakened, never returns to its previous state. What's most striking is that the serpent offers nothing concrete. It doesn't deliver the fruit, It doesn't promise any advantage. It doesn't use emotional manipulation. What it brings is something far more powerful: the chance for Eve to access her own lucidity. It's like when someone asks us a question that deeply shakes our mindset, revealing that the world wasn't as simple as it seemed. A question that opens inner doors, that shines a light on places that were previously dormant. The awakening begins exactly like that, in silence, with a slight disturbance that grows until it becomes impossible to ignore. The serpent also reveals something no one had told Eve: that there is a power within her that doesn't depend on external instructions, but on a deep understanding of her own soul. When it speaks of freedom, it's not talking about disobedience, it's talking about autonomy. An inner freedom that is born when you understand your own nature and stop hiding behind rules you don't understand. It invites Eve to see with her own eyes, to think with her own mind, to feel with her own conscience. This is the true spiritual revolution. Not a violent break, but an expansion of vision. Now, imagine Eve at that moment, her mind touched by a revelation she never imagined possible. Until then, all the answers were readily available. Eden was a place where nothing needed to be questioned. And suddenly, a voice emerges saying that there is something within her that she has never accessed. This idea, in itself, already carries a gigantic emotional impact. The serpent awakens not only curiosity, it awakens identity. It makes Eve realize that her innocence was not purity, but slumber. That her obedience was not virtue, but an absence of reflection. This turning point is profoundly human. All of us, at some point in our lives, go through periods where we live on autopilot, following predefined paths, repeating old patterns, until something breaks that cycle. It could be an unexpected conversation, a loss, a discovery, a book, a look, a mistake. From that moment on, you begin to see details of your own existence that previously went unnoticed. Eva's inner journey symbolizes this exact point. The instant you understand that living only comfortably doesn't mean living fully. The serpent, then, assumes the classic role of spiritual guide in ancient mythologies. It doesn't position itself as superior. It positions itself as a mirror. A mirror that doesn't show the face, but the soul. It doesn't bring ready-made answers. It brings the right questions. The questions that break down walls, that open fissures, that bring light where there was once shadow. And in doing so, it breaks the true enchantment that held Eve captive, the enchantment of unconsciousness. Because the greatest prison is not physical, it's mental. It's the state in which you don't know who you are, what you feel, what you think, what you truly desire. And when Eve hears all this, when she processes this possibility, something within her awakens powerfully. She realizes that Eden, though beautiful, was limited. It was static. It was a setting where nothing evolved. The idea of remaining there forever begins to sound less like a blessing and more like stagnation. She finally sees that that space was never intended to be the final destination, but the beginning. And suddenly, the fruit no longer seems like a symbol of disobedience. It seems like a portal. It seems like a choice, a decision that inaugurates not a fall, but a journey. That's why this conversation has always been so feared. Because nothing threatens a control system more than an awakened individual. Once you see, you can no longer unsee. Once you understand, you can no longer go back. The serpent didn't offer sin, it offered awareness. It offered Eve the opportunity to perceive her divine nature. And awareness is always more dangerous to any rigid structure than obedience. If this part of the story affected you, leave a comment below. This vision awakens me. Or any phrase that translates what you felt. Now we move on, because the next layer of this narrative reveals something even deeper about the true meaning of Eva's awakening. When consciousness awakens within Eve, the fruit ceases to be merely an object in the center of the garden and comes to represent something much greater, a crossroads. It is no longer just a forbidden symbol. It becomes the exact point where her inner journey meets concrete reality. Until that moment, everything existed in the realm of ideas, reflection, and the doubt that was beginning to emerge. But there comes a time when thinking is no longer enough. It is necessary to decide. And that is precisely what makes the moment with the fruit so powerful. It marks the passage from theory to experience, from curiosity to transformation. Eva doesn't touch the fruit impulsively. Contrary to what many interpretations try to suggest, there's no hurry, no desperation, no physical hunger there. What exists is a real hunger, a deep desire to go beyond the surface of things and access the inner workings of her own existence. She knows that if she eats, nothing will be the same. And she feels, at the same time, that remaining outside this knowledge also has a price. The price of continuing to live in a reality where the pieces only fit together halfway. It is at this point that Eve becomes a spiritual pioneer. For the first time, a human being consciously confronts her own freedom. She understands, albeit intuitively, that she is about to assume responsibility for herself. Eden, which previously functioned as a ready-made environment, now becomes a scenario that demands choice. And it is with this mindset, full of fear and courage mixed together, that she reaches out and touches the fruit. This simple gesture carries the power of all decisions that change destinies. When her fingers touch the fruit's peel, something begins to change inside. It's not magic in the common sense. It's a realignment of perception. Eva feels she is crossing an invisible boundary. By bringing the fruit to her lips, she is symbolically allowing knowledge to cease being external and become part of her. What was once a concept will now be experience. What was once a hidden truth will now become an intimate revelation, engraved in the memory of the body, mind, and soul. The first contact, the first taste, the first instant after the bite, all of this is described quickly in the scriptures, but if we look closely, we realize that energetically it's an earthquake. Not in the garden, but inside her. The external world remains the same for a few seconds. The trees are still in place, the sky remains the same, the light doesn't change color. But inside, her reality reorganizes itself. It's as if a window opens onto a world that has always been there, but that she never noticed. She discovers that there is an entire universe inside her, as vast as the garden around her. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this is the point where human experience is born in full force. Upon tasting the fruit, Eve begins to intensely feel things that were previously only shadows of sensations. Responsibility, the weight of choices, awareness of her own impact, perception of cause and effect. She begins to realize that every decision creates a trail, that every thought has consequences, that every movement of the soul generates waves that expand far beyond the present moment. Innocence gives way to lucidity. And that's precisely where many people confuse awakening with guilt. Eve doesn't become guilty for experiencing knowledge. She becomes more aware. This awareness hurts at times, it's true. Seeing oneself clearly can be uncomfortable. Seeing one's own shadows, limitations, and contradictions isn't always pleasant. But that's precisely what makes awakening so courageous. The easiest path would be to continue living in a state of spiritual anesthesia, repeating routines, letting others define what is right or wrong. The most courageous path is to accept seeing everything as it is, without masks. From that moment on, Eva understands what it means to be human in a much broader sense. Being human is not just existing in a body, walking, relating to others, and occupying a space in the world. Being human, in this deeper perspective, is carrying within oneself a vast field of emotions, doubts, desires, memories, and possibilities. It is realizing that there is a constant dialogue between the inner and outer worlds, between what happens outside and what is processed inside. And Eva realizes that, without this awareness, life would be an empty succession of days. The fruit, then, ceases to be the object of error and becomes the symbol of this first dive into one's own interiority. It represents the passage from external control to internal responsibility. Nothing is merely happening to her anymore. Now, she also happens to the world. Her choices have an impact. Her perspective changes how reality presents itself. Her decisions open paths and close doors. This is the true transformation. When you understand that you are not just a spectator of creation, but an active participant in it. And perhaps, in some way, you have already experienced a fruit moment in your own journey. A moment when you realize that you could no longer blame fate, luck, family, the system, the past. A moment when you felt strongly that continuing to grow meant taking ownership of your own story. It's uncomfortable, yes, but it's liberating. Because when you take that place, you stop being a prisoner of circumstances and become a co-author of your own path. And when we look calmly at this symbol, we realize that the fruit changes shape throughout our lives. Sometimes it appears as a frightening opportunity, sometimes as a difficult conversation you're postponing, sometimes as a radical change of course that you feel deep down but don't have the courage to embrace. In all these cases, the structure is the same. Something calls you out of your comfort zone and invites you to see more, to feel more, to take more responsibility. That's when the journey becomes truly spiritual, even if on the outside it seems like just a change of job, relationship, city, or worldview. Eve was the first to take that step, the first to choose awareness over comfortable ignorance, the first to say with her act, "I accept to see." Awakening requires courage, and she was the first to demonstrate that courage at the heart of the human narrative. Not as a perfect heroine, but as a soul in process, as someone willing to traverse the unknown in search of truth. If this reading touches something within you, write in the comments, "I choose to awaken," or another phrase that translates your own inner decision. Because in the end, each of us, in our own way, also has our own fruit before us, waiting for the moment of choice. And it is precisely after this choice that the story changes color. Until the moment Eve bites the fruit, everything could, in theory, return to how it was before. There was the possibility of retreating, of pretending nothing had happened, of continuing in the comfort of that static paradise. But from the instant consciousness awakens, there is no turning back. The departure from Eden begins there, not as a scene of punishment, but as the natural unfolding of an internal transformation. First, the mentality changes, then reality must follow. It is not an offended God expelling two guilty parties. It is life itself pushing the soul to the next level of the journey. When we look closely at this part of the narrative, we realize that much has been interpreted in reverse. We have been taught to see the so-called fall as a tragedy, as if humanity had lost everything. But did it really lose everything? Or did it simply leave a state of spiritual infancy to enter a more complex, more challenging, yet much truer path? The hidden truth in this passage is that leaving Eden is less an expulsion and more a journey. It is the necessary change of scenery so that what awakened within Eve and Adam can in fact be lived out in practice. Think about it. What sense would it make to awaken consciousness and remain in a place where nothing changes? What sense would it make to see duality, to perceive light and shadow, good and evil, cause and effect, and yet remain in a reality where none of this exists concretely? It would make no sense at all. From the moment vision expands, the world needs to become a field of experience. Humanity did not fall, it began to walk. It took its first steps out of the cradle, stumbling, making mistakes, learning, but finally moving. The expulsion is, in fact, the beginning of human history, the beginning of a journey through time, through decisions, through consequences, and through the backstage of the soul itself. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this shift in perspective completely transforms how we see ourselves today. If leaving Eden wasn't a punishment, but a new beginning, then life isn't a punishment, it's a field of learning. Suffering isn't proof of abandonment, it's part of the process of maturing consciousness. Every challenge, every pain, every crisis becomes, within this vision, an opportunity to integrate what was previously theoretical. What Eve symbolically accessed when she tasted the fruit, the notion of responsibility, of choice, of impact, now needs to be lived generation after generation, in different scenarios, cultures, histories, and bodies. It's as if all of humanity has been thrown into a vast spiritual laboratory. Here, we learn and practice what it means to love, add, destroy, rebuild, forgive, let go, and start over. Duality is not a curse. It is the mirror where we clearly see who we are in every decision. Without contrast, there is no perception. Without mistakes, there is no awareness of success. Without night, the dawn has no impact. The exodus from Eden inaugurated this intense experience of contrast. And however harsh it may seem at times, it is this contrast that allows light to be truly recognized as light. Many people unconsciously carry the feeling that we shouldn't be here, as if existence were a mistake, a punishment, a place where we are paying for something we never quite understood. But if we look through the lens of this interpretation, everything takes on a different meaning. Being here is actively participating in a cosmic process of revelations. It is walking through an imperfect world to discover, within oneself, something that has always been whole. The road of duality, with its polarities, conflicts, and paradoxes, is the necessary path to rediscover one's own light. Not the childlike light of Eden, protected from everything, but a mature light, honed by experience. Notice how this changes your relationship with life itself. It ceases to be a random sequence of events and becomes a layered journey, with meaning, with internal and external movements constantly mirroring each other. Each challenging situation becomes an invitation to observe which part of yourself is being called to grow. Each pain reveals a point where consciousness has not yet fully expanded. Each difficult choice exposes the tension between fear and love, between control and trust. Going through all this is not easy. It never has been. But that's how the soul ceases to be just a pretty word and becomes something alive, pulsating behind every look, every gesture, every decision. And it's interesting to note how this ancient story resonates with our present. Because deep down, we all repeat this movement of leaving Eden several times throughout our lives. Every time you leave behind a phase in which you no longer fit, every time you abandon an illusion, every time you face a truth you'd rather not see, you are leaving a personal little Eden. And just as happened with Eve and Adam, sometimes this departure hurts. Sometimes it comes surrounded by feelings of loss, guilt, and fear of the unknown. But after some time, we realize it was necessary, that staying would have meant betraying our own essence. This interpretation also redefines the idea of divine punishment. If the expulsion was, in fact, a loving push towards expansion, then the divine is not against humanity. It is accompanying the journey of consciousness. It is present behind the scenes, sustaining the stage in which our experiences take place. Not as a distant judge, but as a field of possibility where each soul can discover, in its own time, who it truly is. In this sense, the end of Eden is not the end of the connection with the sacred. It is the beginning of a different form of relationship, less childish and more responsible. When Eve and Adam cross the boundaries of the garden and enter the world out there, the story doesn't end, it begins. Families, conflicts, jobs, constructions, cities, cultures, unanswered questions, profound silences, spiritual quests, internal and external revolutions all begin. All of this is born from that moment. And when you observe humanity today, with its mistakes, its creations, its wars, its affections, its healings, and its discoveries, you are seeing the unfolding of a single gesture, the gesture of accepting to leave stagnation behind. Ultimately, the great revelation is that the fall may never have happened. What did happen was a change of phase, like leaving a brightly lit and protected room to walk on a long road full of curves, storms, and new landscapes. Is it more dangerous? Yes. Is it more intense? Undoubtedly. But it is also much more real. And it is in this reality, with all its complexity, that the soul finds authentic opportunities for growth. If this way of seeing the exit from Eden makes sense to you, comment below. The journey has begun, or write in your own words what this vision awakened in you. That way we can continue exploring, together, the deeper layers of this story which, at its core, is also our own. The greatest truth hidden behind this entire narrative is that, deep down, the serpent was never interested in destroying humankind, but in reminding them of something they had forgotten, who they truly are. If we calmly examine all the steps of this story, the silence of Eden, the dialogue, the fruit, the journey into the world, we can perceive an invisible thread connecting everything. This thread is awakening. Nothing there is random. The presence of the serpent, the questioning, Eve's choice, the crossing out of the garden, all of this points in the same direction. The human soul was not born to remain safely asleep, but to awaken amidst reality, with all its lights and shadows. From a symbolic point of view, the serpent knew that a paradise without consciousness was not humanity's final destiny, but merely a stage. It wanted, so to speak, Eve to see beyond the frame, beyond the ready-made story, beyond the comfortable script. It wanted her to perceive the hidden truth behind everything. The divine is not only outside in a distant God, it pulsates within the very soul. And as long as Eve remained in a childlike state, receiving everything predigested, without questioning, without choosing, without taking responsibility, this inner spark would remain extinguished. The serpent then becomes the trigger for this remembrance. It awakens in Eve the feeling that there is something within her that is greater than the role she has been given. This is where the mindset shifts. Before, spirituality was experienced as obedience. Afterward, it becomes experienced as awareness. Before, everything came from the outside. Afterward, it begins to sprout from within. And it is precisely this movement that many ancient traditions attempt to describe with different symbols. The moment when the human being ceases to be merely a creature and begins to recognize themselves as a co-creator, responsible, and active participant in their own journey. The serpent didn't want Eve to fall. It wanted her to see. It wanted her to cross the boundary between automatic existence and awakened existence. If we translate this to our lives today, it becomes even clearer. How many times have you felt like you were living in a personal Eden? A stable job, a predictable relationship, a safe routine. But inside, something started to bother you. It wasn't necessarily a tragedy, but a feeling that there was a lack of depth, a lack of truth, a lack of real life. And suddenly, a kind of serpent appears in your path. A conversation that stirs you, an unexpected crisis, a loss, an insight, a book, an encounter. Something that takes you out of autopilot and forces you to reconsider everything. Sometimes you even try to cling to the old paradise again, but you feel that you no longer fit there. It's as if the old scenario can no longer sustain the new awareness that has been born. That's why, in spiritual terms, the serpent also represents the courage to face the truth. Not theoretical truth, beautiful in phrases, but the truth that impacts concrete life. The truth that affects decisions, relationships, the way you see yourself. The serpent wanted Eve to glimpse this deeper level of reality. The understanding that light isn't comfortable all the time. Sometimes the light hurts. Sometimes it reveals things we'd rather not see. But still, it's light. And only it can show the way back to the center of the soul. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject and bring up a point that directly touches on our own spiritual awakening. When the serpent opens Eve's eyes, it is not merely changing the destiny of a biblical character. It is inaugurating a pattern that would repeat itself throughout history in countless forms. In every myth, in every legend, in every tradition that speaks of a hero or heroine leaving their homeland to face challenges, there is an echo of this same scene. Someone who leaves their comfort zone and embarks on a journey. Eve's awakening is the archetype of the first soul that has the courage to leave its spiritual cradle and walk on its own 2 feet. And the most interesting thing is that this awakening doesn't transform Eve into a perfect goddess, but into a whole human being. She begins to feel fear, shame, longing, desire, doubt. All of this, which we sometimes interpret as failure, is actually part of the experience. The serpent wanted her to glimpse exactly that. To be human is to feel everything deeply and still keep walking. It's knowing that you won't always get it right, but still taking the risk of living. Consciousness doesn't eliminate vulnerability, it only removes the blindfold. From then on, you see the path more clearly, but you still have to choose each step. Perhaps that's why so many people are still afraid to bite the fruit today. Because awakening takes work. It's scary. It forces you to abandon old narratives, to confront traumas, to reconsider beliefs, to admit that not everything you've believed your whole life was, in fact, true. It forces you to look into your emotional background, at what you hide even from yourself. And at the same time, it is this very process that returns you to life with a new strength. After you truly see yourself, you can no longer accept just anything. You begin to choose more consciously, to perceive the impact of your decisions, to take better care of your energy, the people around you, and the path you tread. Ultimately, what the serpent wanted Eve to see is something that is also being offered to us all the time: the opportunity to awaken. To leave behind the comfortable illusion and enter into a more honest relationship with one's own soul. To realize that spirituality is not a distant scenario, but a way of walking through the world with more presence, more responsibility, more truth. Eve's awakening, then, is not an isolated event in the past, it is a mirror. It shows what happens whenever someone chooses to watch, instead of just repeating. And that's why, when we hear this story from this angle, the question changes completely. The question ceases to be, why did Eve eat the fruit? And becomes, when will we do the same? When will we stop living on autopilot, accepting shallow explanations about who we are and why we are here? When will we allow ourselves to traverse our own personal Edens, facing the duality of life with more awareness, instead of waiting for a ready-made paradise where nothing challenges us? Ultimately, this narrative isn't pointing the finger at Eve. It's holding up a mirror to each of us. The serpent, the fruit, the garden, the exit. All of these are symbols of an inner movement that happens sooner or later within those who are willing to seek something beyond the surface. And perhaps the true sin, if there is one, isn't eating the fruit, but refusing to awaken when life calls you to do so. If this vision resonated with you in any way, comment below. This makes sense to me, or write in your own words what this story sparked within your journey. In this way, this ancient narrative of Eden ceases to be merely the past and continues to reveal itself, little by little, within your own consciousness. And if you've made it this far, to this final moment of our journey, that already says a lot about you. It means that something in this reflection has found a space within your consciousness, that some layer of this ancient history has touched your own story. And honestly, it's an honor to walk with you to this point. If this kind of content makes you think, helps you see beyond the surface, and awakens something that may have been silent inside, then it's worth continuing to build this together. Therefore, if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, please subscribe, not as an automatic gesture, but as a way to keep alive this space where you and I explore these profound truths calmly, deeply, and meaningfully. And if you truly felt that connection throughout the video, please leave a like. Not for the video itself, but for the conversation we created here. It's this simple gesture that keeps this message reaching people who are also seeking to understand their own spiritual journey. Oh, and before you go, leave a comment saying this message was for me, or using your own words, just so I know you were with me until the end, present in every layer of this reflection. There's a video over here that delves even deeper into this topic and continues along the same lines of awakening and awareness. Click and follow along with me there. The journey is just beginning.